when a 19-year-old Latina stood up in court and said, "I'm my dad's lawyer." No one expected what happened next. The morning sun filtered through the tall courthouse windows, painting the room in a golden hue that did nothing to soften the tension in the air. People shuffled in, murmuring in low tones, their eyes darting toward the defendant's table where Miguel Alvarez, a man in his late 40s, sat with his hands clasped tightly. His eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights and the silent plea of a man cornered by the system. Miguel wasn't a criminal, at least not in the way the prosecution wanted to paint him. He was a hard-working auto mechanic who had built his small shop from the ground up, a pillar in his neighborhood, known for fixing cars for struggling families at little or no charge. But now, he stood accused of insurance fraud, a charge that threatened to ruin his life and take away everything he had worked for. Sitting in the gallery, Sofia Alvarez, just 19 years old, clutched a folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her long dark hair framed a determined face that was far too young for the burden she carried. She had grown up watching her father work until his hands were blistered and his clothes soaked with sweat. She knew he wasn't perfect, but he was honest. And now, the system was treating him like a criminal because he couldn't afford the kind of lawyer who could fight back effectively. The public defender assigned to Miguel's case had been underwhelming, to put it mildly. Sofia had sat in meetings where the man barely skimmed through the case file, spoke to her father in a condescending tone, and seemed more interested in closing the case quickly than actually proving Miguel's innocence. Sofia had been secretly preparing for weeks, reading law books, poring over case files, and practicing arguments late into the night. She wasn't a licensed attorney. She knew that. But she had been accepted into law school for the coming fall, and she had a plan. That morning, just before court was called into session, the public defender leaned over to Miguel and whispered something that made Sofia's blood boil. "Best you can do is take the plea deal. 2 years, maybe out in one for good behavior." Miguel's shoulders slumped. But before he could respond, Sofia's voice cut through the heavy silence. Double quotes, "No, my dad isn't taking that deal." The defender turned, frowning. "Kid, this isn't." "I'm not a kid," she said firmly. "I'm his legal representative today." The words caused a ripple of murmurs across the courtroom. Even the judge, Hun Meredith Blake, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 60s known for her no-nonsense demeanor, raised an eyebrow. "Miss Alvarez, you're not listed as counsel for the defense," the judge said carefully. Sofia took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Your Honor, my father has the right to represent himself, and he chooses me to speak for him." The judge tapped her pen against the bench, clearly weighing her options. "This is highly irregular," she said. "You're not licensed to practice law." Sofia nodded. "I know, but I am his daughter. I have been studying the case extensively, and I've been accepted into law school. I understand the risks. My father trusts me, and I will not let him go to prison for something he didn't do." The judge studied her for a long moment, as though peering into her soul. Finally, she sighed. "Very well, the defendant may represent himself, with his daughter speaking on his behalf as an advisor. But, Miss Alvarez, one misstep, and I'll shut this down immediately." "Understood." Sofia's lips curled into the smallest of smiles. "Understood, Your Honor." Miguel reached over and squeezed her hand, his eyes moist. "Mia, are you sure about this?" She leaned in, her voice soft but steady. "Dad, I was born for this." The bailiff called the court to order, and as the first witness was sworn in, the prosecutor, Daniel Harper, smirked at Sofia as if she were a child about to be crushed by the weight of the law. Sofia stared right back, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with the fire of someone who was ready to fight the impossible. The battle had begun. The courtroom was still settling from the shock of Judge Blake's decision when Daniel Harper, the prosecutor, rose from his chair. He was the kind of man who thrived on intimidation, tall, broad-shouldered, with an expensive suit and a reputation for crushing defendants without mercy. His smirk was almost theatrical as he addressed the judge. Your Honor, the state will proceed. Though I must note for the record that this arrangement borders on the absurd. The judge's eyes narrowed. Mr. Harper, your record has been noted. Now proceed. Harper turned toward the jury, his voice dripping with confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is simple. The defendant, Miguel Alvarez, knowingly submitted false repair claims to an insurance company, billing for damages that didn't exist. We will present documentation, witnesses, and photographic evidence proving that this was deliberate fraud. It's not personal, it's just the law. Sophia felt her pulse quicken. She wasn't naive. She knew Harper's opening remarks were designed to plant seeds of guilt before any evidence had even been examined, but she had read enough trial transcripts to recognize the tactic, and she was ready. When Harper called his first witness, Terry Whitman, a claims adjuster for the insurance company, Sophia's stomach tightened. She had studied Whitman's written statement for days. She knew his testimony would be damaging. Unless she could pick it apart, Whitman walked to the stand, adjusting his tie like he was preparing for a performance. After being sworn in, Harper guided him through the familiar script. Mr. Whitman, did you inspect the vehicle in question? Yes, and in your professional opinion, were the damages consistent with the claim submitted? No, they were not. The supposed collision damage appeared old and unrelated to the accident described. Did you communicate this to the insurance company? Yes, I did. Sophia scribbled notes quickly. Harper was trying to make this sound airtight, but she spotted something. Whitman hadn't mentioned photographs yet, and when Harper finally introduced them into evidence, Sophia's eyes lit up. They were printed images, not originals, and the time stamps were off. When Harper finished, he gave a smug nod towards Sophia. Your witness. Sophia stood, gripping the lectern like it was an anchor in a storm. Mr. Whitman, you said you inspected the vehicle yourself, correct? Yes. On what date? March 14th. Sophia flipped open the folder in front of her. So, these photographs, you're certain they were taken on March 14th as well? Whitman hesitated. Just slightly? Yes. To the best of my knowledge. To the best of your knowledge, Sophia repeated, pacing slowly. Mr. Whitman, are you aware that the metadata from the original digital files shows these images were taken on February 28th, over 2 weeks earlier? The jurors shifted in their seats. Harper stood abruptly. Objection. Your Honor, she's speculating on metadata we haven't verified. Sophia didn't flinch. Your Honor, I have copies of the original files obtained through discovery. The timestamps clearly show February 28th. I can submit them as an exhibit. Judge Blake adjusted her glasses. Mr. Harper, is this true? Harper's jaw tightened. The state will need to confirm. Sophia pressed on. Mr. Whitman, if these photographs were taken 2 weeks before you inspected the vehicle, how? Can you testify under oath that the condition you saw matched the day of the supposed inspection? Whitman's face reddened. I must have received them later. I assumed they were from the inspection day. Assumed. Sophia's voice was razor-sharp now. Sir, in this courtroom, assumptions can destroy a man's life, my father's life. Isn't it possible that the damage you saw in the photos was from an entirely different incident? Harper shot to his feet again. Objection. Withdrawn. Sophia said smoothly, stepping back from the witness stand. No further questions. Whitman avoided eye contact as he stepped down. Sophia returned to her seat, her heart racing. She had just created the first crack in the prosecution's case, and she could feel the judge watching her more closely now, as if reconsidering her earlier skepticism. During the recess, Miguel leaned toward her, his voice low. Mia, how did you even find that date thing? Sophia smiled faintly. Dad, you taught me how to fix cars. I just applied the same idea to fixing this case. You told me once, the problem isn't always what it looks like. You have to dig until you see the truth. I dug. When court resumed, Harper's demeanor had shifted. He was more measured, more careful, but also more determined to discredit her. He called the next witness, Officer Greg Hanlon, the police investigator who had signed off on the report. Sophia knew this was coming. Hanlon's report had been the backbone of the charges. If she could shake his credibility, everything else might start to unravel. But Harper was smart. His questioning was tight, leaving little room for her to maneuver. Hanlon testified that he visited Miguel's shop, compared the claim to the repairs, and concluded that fraud had occurred. When it was Sophia's turn, she approached slowly. Officer Hanlon, how many years have you been in law enforcement? 18. And in that time, how many insurance fraud cases have you investigated? Dozens? So you're an expert. I like to think so. Sophia paused, then took a calculated risk. In all those cases, have you ever been wrong? Hanlon frowned. I base my conclusions on the evidence. Evidence which, in this case, included photographs taken 2 weeks before the supposed inspection date. Correct. Harper objected, but Judge Blake overruled. Hanlon hesitated. If that's true, it would be unusual. Sophia leaned in. Unusual enough to reconsider your conclusion. The courtroom fell silent. Hanlon shifted uncomfortably. I can't answer that without reviewing all the facts again. Sophia smiled politely. That's all I needed. No further questions. When she sat down, Miguel squeezed her hand. She was fighting seasoned professionals, and somehow she was holding her ground. Judge Blake called for the day's adjournment, her gaze lingering on Sophia. Court will resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. Miss Alvarez. Be ready. Sophia met her eyes. Always, Your Honor. As they left the courthouse, reporters were already outside, microphones ready. The story of the 19-year-old Latina defending her father was beginning to spread, but Sophia didn't care about headlines. She cared about one thing. Winning. The morning of the second day felt different. The crisp air outside the courthouse was electric, charged with whispers of yesterday's drama. Local news vans were parked along the curb, their antennas stretching skyward like metal fingers reaching for a signal. Sophia caught sight of her own face on a reporter's preview screen. She looked composed in the footage, but she remembered the pounding in her chest. Miguel walked beside her, his steps slower than usual. Mia, we can still, let someone else take over. This is a lot for you. Sophia shook her head, her tone soft but firm. Dad, I've seen the evidence. Something's off. This isn't just about you. Someone wanted you in this? Physician, as they stepped into the courtroom, Daniel Harper was already at his table, flipping through a fresh stack of documents. He glanced up at her with a look that said, I'm ready for you today. But Sophia had her own plan, and it started with the discovery she had made late last night. She had been reviewing the claim forms again when she noticed something strange. The signature on one of the repair invoices wasn't her father's handwriting. It wasn't even close. She compared it to other signatures Miguel had made over the years. Different slant, different pressure, almost like it had been traced from a template. But that wasn't all. The invoice listed a part replacement for a high-end luxury car, a make and model Miguel's shop had never serviced. She remembered her father once saying, I don't touch those fancy imports, too much hassle. When court began, Harper called a new witness, Linda Marks, the insurance company's fraud investigator. She was polished, professional, and clearly used to testifying. Harper walked her through the paperwork that supposedly proved Miguel had submitted false claims. When it was Sophia's turn, she stood slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make people lean in. Ms. Marks, how long have you been with the company? 10 years. And in those 10 years, have you ever personally handled claims involving small, independent shops like my father's? Many times. Sophia flipped through the documents. In your review of this case, did you personally visit Alvarez? Auto repair. No, I relied on the police report and the adjuster's findings. Sophia nodded as if she expected that answer. So, you never spoke directly to my father about the claim? That's correct. Then perhaps you can explain, Sophia said, holding up the invoice, why this document contains a signature that is not my father's. A ripple of murmurs swept the courtroom. Harper rose. Objection. There's no proof that's not the defendant's signature. Sophia turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have multiple samples of my father's signature from bank records, tax filings, and legal documents. The difference is obvious, even to the untrained eye. And if necessary, I'm prepared to request a handwriting expert. Judge. Blake leaned forward, examining the papers Sophia handed up. After a long pause, she spoke. Mr. Harper, the signature on this invoice does appear inconsistent. Do you have an explanation? Harper's jaw flexed. The state will review the document. Sophia pressed on. Ms. Marks, are you aware that the part listed on this invoice is for a luxury vehicle my father has never serviced? Marks hesitated, glancing at Harper. That would be unusual. Sophia's tone sharpened. Unusual or impossible. My father doesn't have the tools or training for that model. Isn't it more likely that this claim was fabricated, either in error or intentionally, and then pinned on him? Mark shifted in her seat. I can't speculate. No further questions, Sophia said, returning to her seat with the faintest flicker of a smile. That moment was pivotal. For the first time, the jury wasn't just looking at Miguel like a defendant. They were looking at him like a man who might have been wronged. During the midday recess, Sophia slipped into the courthouse hallway to catch her breath. That's when she heard voices around the corner. Harper's voice, low but sharp, speaking to someone on the phone. No, she's digging too much. I thought the forged invoice would be buried in the stack. If she connects it to Peterson, he stopped, as if realizing the hallway might not be empty. Sophia froze. Peterson. She didn't recognize the name, but the way Harper said it made her skin prickle. She waited until his footsteps faded before heading back inside, her mind racing. When court resumed, Harper seemed rattled. His questioning of the next witness, a junior claims clerk, was clumsier than usual. Sophia pounced on every inconsistency, carefully planting seeds in the jury's mind. This wasn't a clear-cut fraud case. This was a mess of sloppy evidence, questionable paperwork, and possible misconduct. By the end of the day, Judge Blake called for adjournment, her voice measured, but her eyes lingering on Harper. Counsel, I suggest both sides review their evidence carefully overnight. Tomorrow, I expect clarity. As they left the courthouse, Miguel asked, What happened in there? You looked like you knew something. Sophia kept her voice low. I think someone forged documents to frame you. And I think Harper knows who. Miguel frowned. But why? That, Sophia said, glancing back toward the courthouse doors, is what I'm going to find out tomorrow. She didn't mention the name she'd overheard. Not yet. But she knew one thing. She was getting closer to the truth. And whoever Peterson was, they were about to become very important to the case. Sophia barely slept that night. The name Peterson kept circling her thoughts like a vulture. She didn't know who he was, but her gut told her he was tied to the forged invoice, and maybe even the entire case. Before dawn, she was at her laptop, combing through public business records, news articles, and court filings. At first, Peterson was just another common last name in the insurance world. But then she found it. Richard L. Peterson, Senior Regional Manager for North Star Insurance, the very company accusing her father. And there was more, a 6-month-old news piece buried in a local business journal. Peterson had been accused of manipulating claim reports to reduce payout losses for the company. The article mentioned undisclosed disciplinary action, but there was no follow-up. By 7 a.m., Sophia had what she needed. She printed the article, highlighted key passages, and slid it into her growing evidence folder. Today, she wasn't just defending her dad. She was going to pull the rug out from under Harper and his witnesses. When court resumed, Harper seemed his usual composed self, but Sophia caught a flicker of tension in his jaw when she entered the room. He called his next witness, Ellen Rhodes, a corporate compliance officer for North Star Insurance. Harper's questioning was routine, aimed at reinforcing the company's credibility. Rhodes testified that all fraud investigations were handled with the utmost integrity and that she was confident in the findings against Miguel. Sophia rose. Papers in hand, Ms. Rhodes. Are you familiar with a man named Richard L. Peterson? The question landed like a pebble in still water, small, but the ripples reached everyone. Rhodes hesitated. Yes, he's a senior manager. Is it true, Sophia continued, that Mr. Peterson was under internal investigation for altering claim data to favor the company's bottom line? Harper shot up. Objection. This is irrelevant character assassination. Sophia didn't look at him. Your Honor, this goes directly to the credibility of the evidence against my father. If a senior manager has a history of manipulating claims, it's reasonable to question whether this case was handled honestly. Judge Blake's eyes narrowed. Mr. Harper, is the claim about Mr. Peterson true? Harper shifted uncomfortably. There were internal matters, but they were resolved. Sophia seized the opening. Resolve how? By firing him. Harper stayed silent. Judge Blake turned back to Rhodes. Answer the question. Rhodes cleared her throat. Mr. Peterson no longer works for North Star. Sophia stepped closer to the witness stand. And did Mr. Peterson have access to the claim files for Alvarez Auto Repair? Yes, Rhodes admitted reluctantly. And isn't it possible that Mr. Peterson, facing pressure to prove the company's toughness on fraud, could have fabricated or altered evidence in this case? Rhodes's lips tightened. I can't speculate. No further questions, Sophia said, returning to her seat, her heart hammering. She just planted a seed of doubt big enough to split the entire case in half. Harper called a short recess, and as Sophia gathered her papers, she felt a presence beside her. It was Judge Blake, leaning slightly over the bench. Miss Alvarez, approach. Sophia did, pulse quickening. In my courtroom, the judge said quietly, we deal in facts, not speculation. If you want to bring this Peterson issue into full play, you'd better have something concrete. Sophia met her gaze. I can get it, Your Honor. I just need the chance. The judge studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. I'll allow you to request a subpoena for Peterson. But you'll need to show cause by the end of today. During lunch, Sophia made calls to journalists, to a contact at the Consumer Protection Office, to anyone who might know Peterson's current whereabouts. Luck was on her side. A retired investigator she'd met during a college internship remembered Peterson and had heard he was living in the next county. Better yet, he still had records from a past complaint, including emails that hinted at Peterson ordering staff to pad fraud cases. By 2 p.m. Sophia was back in the courtroom with printed copies. She moved to the lectern. Your Honor, I am submitting newly discovered evidence suggesting that Richard L. Peterson engaged in systemic document falsification for North Star Insurance, including altering dates and signatures. This pattern matches the anomalies in my father's case. I request that Mr. Peterson be subpoenaed as a witness. Harper tried to object, but the judge's gavel came down sharply. Overruled. The subpoena is granted. Mr. Harper, have your office locate Mr. Peterson. We'll resume tomorrow morning with his testimony. Sophia allowed herself the smallest smile. The momentum had shifted. As they left the courthouse, Miguel was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, Mia, even if you prove Peterson's dirty, will that be enough? Sophia slipped her arm through his. Maybe, or maybe it'll be the start, but Dad. For the first time, they're on the defensive. That's how we win. She didn't tell him that she expected Peterson's testimony to be explosive. If her instincts were right, Tomorrow would change everything. Not just for Miguel, but for every small business owner. North Star had STEAM or OLLED. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread fast. The man behind North Star Insurance's fraud investigations, the elusive Richard L. Peterson, had been subpoenaed to testify. Reporters filled the back rows, pens poised, cameras waiting for the moment he walked in. Sophia sat at the defense table, her notes neatly organized, but her fingers tapped lightly against the folder. She wasn't nervous. She was red-eyed. Doors opened, and Peterson entered. He was in his late 50s, his once expensive suit now rumpled, his face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. His eyes flicked briefly towards Sophia, and she caught a flash of recognition, and something else, fear. After being sworn in, Harper wasted no time. Mr. Peterson, you were a senior regional manager for North Star Insurance until last November, and you left on your own accord? Harper asked, clearly trying to get ahead of what was coming. Peterson's jaw tightened. No, I was terminated. The room went still. Harper pressed on, his voice strained. For what reason? Peterson hesitated, glancing towards Sophia. They said I violated company policy. But that's not the whole story. Sophia rose slowly, taking the floor. Mr. Peterson, let's talk about company policy. Did it include forging signatures on claim documents? Harper jumped up. Objection. Judge Blake's gavel came down, overruled. The witness will answer. Peterson swallowed hard. I was under pressure. North Star was losing money on payouts. My superiors made it clear. Find fraud. Or make it. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Sophia leaned in. And in my father's case, Peterson's voice cracked slightly. I told a junior adjuster to pull an old set of vehicle damage photos from another file and attach them to Mr. Alvarez's claim. The invoice with the forged signature. I approved it. I thought no one would notice. Miguel's hand gripped the edge of the table. Sophia's pen stilled. Why target my father? And she asked, her voice steady but sharp. Peterson exhaled. He disputed a small claim years ago and cost the company money. They saw him as a troublemaker. The fraud charge was supposed to shut him up. The room erupted in murmurs. Judge Blake banged her gavel. Order. Sophia took a step closer to the stand. Mr. Peterson, do you realize that what you did nearly destroyed an innocent man's life? Peterson's eyes dropped. Yes, and I'm sorry. Sorry, Sophia repeated, her voice cold now. Doesn't erase the months my father spent under a cloud of suspicion. It doesn't give him back the customers he lost, the nights he couldn't sleep, or the faith he had in the system. Peterson didn't respond. No further questions. Sophia said, returning to her seat. She didn't need to say more. The damage was done. The jury was visibly shaken. Harper tried to recover, but every word out of his mouth sounded hollow now. His cross-examination only confirmed Peterson's role in falsifying evidence, and by the time the state rested, it was clear the tide had fully turned. Sophia stood for her closing argument, her voice resonating through the silent courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the truth. My father, Miguel Alvarez, is not a criminal. He's a man who fixes cars, who helps neighbors, who raised his daughter to believe in hard work and justice. You've seen how the evidence was manipulated. You've heard from the very man who approved the forgery. If this can happen to my father, it can happen to any small business owner, any working man or woman who dares to stand up to a corporation. Today, you have the power to make it right, not just for him, but for every person who's ever been told they're too small to fight back. The law is not meant to be a weapon for the powerful. It is meant to be a shield for the innocent. My father is innocent. I ask you, bring him home. When she finished, there was a stillness in the air that seemed to hum. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood, unfolding the slip of paper with hands that trembled slightly, on the charge of insurance Fraud. We find the defendant, Miguel Alvarez, not guilty. The words seemed to echo in Miguel's ears. He turned to Sofia, his eyes glistening, and pulled her into a tight embrace. Mia, you saved me. Reporters swarmed the aisle, shouting questions, but Judge Blake's gavel cut through the noise. Before we adjourn, she said, looking directly at Sofia, I want to say something. Miss Alvarez, I was skeptical when you first stood before Emmy, but you demonstrated preparation, composure, and a commitment to truth that would put many seasoned attorneys to shame. I hope law school knows the kind of student they're getting. Sophia smiled, a lump forming in her throat. Thank you, Your Honor. She spoke briefly to the press, not about herself, but about the need for accountability. Peterson's admission had already sparked talk of an investigation into North Star Insurance. One reporter shouted, Sophia, what's next for you? She glanced at her father, who was smiling for the first time in months. Law school, she said simply, and at that, maybe making sure no one else has to go through what my dad went through. Miguel wrapped an arm around her shoulders. I think you're going to be a great lawyer, Mia. She smiled up at him. I think so too. And as they walked away from the courthouse, the crowd buzzing behind them, Sophia knew that this was just the beginning, not only of her career, but of a promise she had made to herself long ago, to fight for the truth, to defend the innocent, and to never, ever let the powerful silence the powerless again.